Hello and welcome to Steve and Dave's 50 Years Ago this month. This is the second half of our 1972 annual review. We're going to be talking about July through December, and we'll get right into it. Enjoy. That brings us to July.
Well, let's do it. So July. Well, quite frankly, the United States is in rapt attention um, over, of all things, chess. So the World Chess Championships are taking place in, of all places, Reykjavik, Iceland. And as a young person, I remember quite distinctly seeing the dateline Reykjavik and not really quite sure where Iceland was. And so, I mean, like a lot of people, right, this was the first time they'd heard much about Iceland. But here in Reykjavik, you had the Soviet chess champion Boris Spassky against the kind of boy wonder from the United States, the guy by the name of Bobby Fischer. Now, Bobby Fischer had rose through the ranks of American chess in the 1960s and curiously also become a kind of media figure. Bobby Fischer you'd see Bobby Fischer on talk shows, you see Bobby Fischer interviews. Bobby Fischer was part of helped sort of ignite a chess boom in the United States, and certainly the Spassky Fischer match in Reykjavik made chess a kind of front page item in the U.S. And again, for a short time, really invigorated chess in the United States. Now, Bobby Fischer was a difficult individual. I think always was a difficult individual. Sometimes he could sort of suppress that. Later in life, he really wasn't unable to. But he was considered a kind of charismatic figure, an exciting, dynamic figure, a figure sort of unchess-like. There was a lot of interest in this match apart from chess because, like with so many things in this era, this was a Cold War showdown, right, between the United States and the Soviet Union.
Like Rocky
And it, yeah, well, no, it's exactly it, right? And so it would be, so while the Cold War and weapons of mass destruction ensured that there wouldn't be a kind of military, we hoped at the time, right? Hoped there wouldn't be a military confrontation. You
that
would
would
see
be
these kind of,
mad.
that would be mad, wouldn't it? Mutually assured destruction. But these kind of sports events then took on incredible meaning. And so whether it was the Olympics or something like, again, this chess championship. Now, the first match, Fischer blundered and famously in chess circles, blundered and Spassky won. But over the span of the next month and a half, Fischer prevailed and became the world chess master. The Soviets had kind of owned chess up to this point, but this was really the beginning of Fischer's unraveling. He would famously not attend the next event and would forfeit his title, and then would spend really the next kind of 3 decades in a spiral of self-destruction, spouting conspiracy and anti-Semite victims. He sought refuge in a kind of pariah state of Yugoslavia for a while. He died a lonely, broken, and very peculiar man in 2008. Spassky, for what it's worth, is still alive. He's a pretty strident nationalist and somewhat of a cultural hero in Russia today. But Fischer was a kind of comet, right? And this was Fischer shining at his brightest in July of 72. Musically, I just wanted to mention one of the great reggae albums of all time, and that's Jimmy Cliff's soundtrack to the album, to the movie, The Harder They Come. This is, I think, considered by many people one of the one or two greatest reggae albums of all time. And I think reggae aficionados might suggest that you need to start with this. Cliff was a figure of some note in Jamaica at this time. And this is a kind of who's who of Jamaican singers and reggae artists. So you've got people like the Melodians, Scotty Maytals, the Slickers, Desmond Decker. Jimmy Cliff is the featured performer here on this double album set. But it really is, what we're seeing here is that reggae is going global. And obviously, Bob Marley is a huge part of this. And we'll talk about Marley in future episodes. But this album is considered a kind of landmark in recording history. It's considered an album of great merit and been awarded protection by the Library of Congress. It's included in every sort of greatest albums of the 20th century. It's also an Island record release, and so Island Records, famously led by Chris Blackwell, is doing a lot for a lot of artists. Island is a really interesting label where all sorts of people find a home there. But Island's specialty, I think it's fair to say, was reggae. And this is right at the top of any Island release. So The Harder They Come is released in this month as well. So what else is going on in July?
I think it's safe to say that Island Records put reggae on the map.
Oh, I think that's fair. No, I think that's right. And I think that, and into that regard, I think it's Chris Blackwell, right? Who, whether as a writer, producer, kind of impresario, is the person to kind of introduce the world to reggae.
And Chris Blackwell also was one of the main investors in the film.
Yes, that's right. The film is,
by the way, that release was in Great Britain. It wasn't released in North America until February 1973.
Comes later. That's right. It comes later. Yeah, but the movie, yeah, it's Jimmy Cliff does enter the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2010. I mean, I think it's fair to say that he's always operated in Marley's shadow, even though Marley's been dead for 40 years. But Island Records in the early 1970s is this fascinating label where you've got progressive acts, you've got folk acts, people like Cat Stevens, for example, and again the reggae piece of it. I don't know if there's any more ambitious label in the world at this point than Island. They're really setting a high bar for other record companies to follow.
Yeah.
Other things. What else is happening this month?
Oh, well, let's just talk about some blaxploitation urban soundtracks. Just on the 11th, Superfly is released by Curtis Mayfield, which of course became also just a major album.
Huge album. Yes.
Also, it's just strange. It's in the same genre, right? And we're both talking about inner city, urban stuff, bad people dealing drugs, and the fight against that, and that's common to both of these movies and both of these soundtracks, and so we've got that going on this month as well. Between The Harder They Come and Superfly, we have on the 10th, Chicago 5, which was the fourth studio album of Chicago and the first single album. They had only ever released double albums. Chicago 1 and 3, I think, were double albums. And then a fourth album that was a 4-album set, a live set. So Chicago 5 is the first one where they just lean back a little bit and only produce a single disc for this.
Well, this is this is an era of excess. I think probably Chicago, that's an example of it. Chicago, of course, is a very ambitious band as well. Extolled the virtues of Chicago in previous episodes, but they're very adventurous. Their musicality, they really go in a lot of different directions. It's I think that their early albums are excellent and definitely worth investigating.
Son of Schmilson comes out on the same day. Son of Schmilson, Harry Nilsson's 8th album, is also coming out on July 10th, 1972.
Yeah, he's an interesting figure, isn't he? He's well known, despite the fact that he's notoriously stage shy. Rarely appeared,
very toured. Rarely, yes.
But he is also famous pals with the A-listers of all A-listers. I mean, he's running around with people like Ringo and John Lennon and the like, and becomes Actually, I think in the Son of Schmielsen era, almost more famous for his partying than he does his recordings. And of course, this will, it will cost him in the end. I mean, he's a candle that burns brightly, but very, very quickly. But
well, that's some very dark Lennon stories involved there too.
Oh yeah,
like maybe an attempt to intentionally ruin Nilsson's voice.
Yeah, destroy his vocal cords, right?
It's very dark stuff.
Yeah, for sure. All part of Lennon's sort of lost weekend.
Yes, that lasted a couple of years.
Yeah, right. That's right.
Anyway, on the 15th, we have Moods by Neil Diamond. The 8th studio album contains his second #1 single, Song Sung Blue.
Song Sung Blue. Yeah. It's amazing, by the way, that you're able to suppress those emotions. And usually you break out and just openly weep when you mention Neil Diamond's name. But he's, sorry. It's, your composure is extraordinary.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, but Diamond's, right. So he's at the apex again of his fame. You're suggesting here, producing a lot of material that a lot of people wanted to listen to. And Moods is, right there. I mean, his albums were big sellers in this era, and he was more than a singles artist. He was also a big album artist.
Yes, yeah, he's flying high at this point.
Flying high, yeah.
We have on the 21st, I Can See Clearly Now by Johnny Nash.
Speaking of reggae, yeah, it sort of brought reggae to the masses. Yeah,
and on the 27th. The Temptations with their second album this year.
Yes, hardworking.
Just incredible. And as we said, this was one of the Norman Whitfield albums. This reached #2 on the Billboard 200 and making that the band's most successful non-collaborative album on the chart. Non-collaborative because they had I think they did some work with the Temptations. I'm sorry, with the Supremes.
Yeah.
And this was their the 12th album to reach #1 on the R&B charts.
Mm-hmm.
So as a group that had been around for over a decade and still going strong.
And I think you can make the case that they were kind of saving Motown.
Well, yeah, the Temptations were certainly one of the. Motown was going through some problems at that point, and some of them were by the fact that Gordy had moved the headquarters to Los Angeles, I think, because he was interested in getting into movies and all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah, that's right.
But but we also have Flying High Together, same day, released on the 27th by Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. This was their last studio album with Smokey Robinson.
This is it, yeah.
So, but here we see Motown still going strong. Also worth mentioning, Foghat was the debut album of that group. Was released also in July. So that's music news for July, and I guess that would bring us to
take us to August then. Yeah, so it's August of, so it's the long hot summer of August, of '72, and so what's going on in August?
Well, in August we have the August 1st, the Backstabbers is released by the OJs.
Philadelphia International, yeah.
Yes. A breakthrough album for the group, reached top 10 in the Billboard Pop Albums chart, selling over 500 copies within a year of release, 500,000. Featured two of the most successful singles, Backstabbers and Love Train, both which and it hit #1 on the Billboard Pop Singles chart. Both of those. So a very big album for them. This is 1972 was a big year for Philadelphia soul, and OJ's was part of that story. But
no question, you're absolutely right about that. I think you can make a pretty strong argument that sort of the center of American recording has sort of drifted to Philadelphia, and that it is sort of the epicenter of what's really, really happening.
Yeah, so shifted not to the east. Michael Jackson's second album of the year, solo album of the year, came out on the 4th. Ben was a
Sorry, go ahead.
a very successful
well, absolutely, no question.
It's the same title.
Yeah. That's one of the creepiest songs ever, but I mean, it's fine.
Yeah, Steve, remind me, what was that song about, Ben?
Pretty sure it's about a pet rat.
A pet rat.
You know, and
yes,
pet rats, which were apparently all the rage. Yeah, it's a
very peculiar. Most people would turn you away, but I don't listen to a word they say.
It's in the running for the weirdest number one of all time. It's just such a but you know what's interesting is that's not even in the as we think about Michael Jackson, it's like not even close to the strangest thing that's associated with him. It's not even close. But yeah, Ben, yeah, it's a big song, and Michael Jackson's a productive figure and has really, I think, in the process of completely sort of usurping his brothers, and he'll go through a fallow period, but I mean Michael Jackson will be the one Jackson that really of note.
Well, and his fallow period doesn't last.
That's true.
Last too long.
That's true.
Well, on the 5th, Clive Davis of Columbia Records signs Aerosmith at Max's Kansas City in New York City.
Real quickly, the Boston band, right? Their debut album then will have the career defining song "Lead On," right? And so it's I mean, Clive Davis is one of the great record men of all time, and you talk about somebody who's been associated with a wide variety of artists, from Aerosmith to Whitney Houston, right, and everything in between.
Yeah, well, I remember hearing "Dream On" for the first time, and just was, blown away.
It's stunning. It's still, it's stunning. It holds up. It's stunning. Yeah.
On the 30th, John Lennon and Yoko Ono headlined the 1-to-1 concert at Madison Square Garden. That was organized by Geraldo Rivera.
Yes.
To benefit mentally handicapped children.
The 1-to-1 concert organized by Rivera, I think, is important to note, because this is part of an effort by Rivera to bring attention to people with the developmental disabilities. Rivera famously did a series of exposés on what was known as the Willbrook School, a state-run school in New York, where children with developmental disabilities were being abused in ways that were almost unimaginable. It's just astounding what was going down, and he really shone a light on it. Rivera's had to be fair, a checkered career, but he deserves a lot of praise for what he did for young people with developmental disabilities. And while he's certainly in the early 1970s, a kind of rock star, palling with John Lennon and people like that, he was more than just a kind of pretty face. He really was doing something really important here.
He was doing investigative journalism back then.
Yes, he was. He really was a journalist of some note in the early to mid 70s. He was an important journalist. I think, things have changed over time, but yeah. So this is, in its own way, a really important event, and in the history of Americans and the work with people with disabilities. Rivera has a distinguished place there. He's really done a lot of good in this area.
Well, I think you could say maybe that was paying the price of the ticket, and once he got the ticket, he just kind of took the ride. That's the way his career.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
Which is unfortunate, because, as you say, he was a journalist of substance. I think at the beginning.
I think that's absolutely right, and clearly the 70s would become a decade of incredible excess, and certainly he partook his share. But there's some. I mean, when all is said and done, Rivera's work exposing the abuses these young people will, I think, stand the test of time. It's a really magnificent achievement, really, really important.
Okay, just a little bit more about the concert itself. Also involved were people like Roberta Flack, Stevie Wonder.
Yeah.
Sha Na Na also performed, along with Elephant's Memory.
Yeah.
When I talk about Elephant's Memory, what does that say to you, Steve?
Well, that says Yoko Ono. Yoko Ono. I think that they were famous. They were kind of her band, I think, in a way.
Essentially her band, yeah, and they did a lot of work together. Elephant's Memory is in their own right. They produced some songs for the soundtrack to Midnight Cowboy.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Received some gold records for that.
Yeah.
But otherwise, yes, mostly it's in the corner of Yoko Ono. The concert was filmed and recorded, later released in February of '86 as the album Live in New York City.
Right. That's right.
So what else is going on in August? Well, we have some other albums that were released. We have Harold Melville and the Blue Notes.
Oh, yeah.
Their debut album, self-titled, although it was originally titled I Miss You. After the success of their first single, You Don't Know Me, If You Don't Know Me By Now, it was renamed. And of course, this is another example of the success of Philadelphia Soul.
Yes,
released on Philadelphia International Records, and was produced by the great Philadelphia Soul producers and writers, Kenneth Gamble and Leon Huff.
Yes, right. And this is also the version of Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes featuring Teddy Pendergrass, right?
Right.
So this is who would go on to, great stardom as a solo act.
Last but not least, Styx released their self-titled debut.
Yeah.
It's funny, the Styx started off as a kind of a covers band, a party band, called themselves the Trade Winds. In 1961, back then, the band was consisted of Chuck and John Panozzo, each 12 years old at the time, playing bass and drums respectively, and their neighbor, 14-year-old Dennis DeYoung, on keyboards, accordion, vocals, and then they went on to add college friends, John Korolewski in '68, and James Young in 1970.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Eventually, Korolewski will leave the band, and will join. Tommy Shaw will join. And the early version of Styx, there was a kind of progressive rock element to
this.
The much derided Styx, but critically, man, they sold a lot of records in the 1970s and early 1980s.
Well, and they were good for a while.
Yeah, they were good for a while. Yes, they were good for a while. Chicago's own Styx. Yep.
Yeah. So
good.
I guess that takes us to September.
Yeah, so September of '72 is dominated by the Summer Olympics in Munich, West Germany. And so in this era, the Olympics were an enormous event internationally, in part because of the Cold War. And so every Olympics was seen as a potential, if not assured, showdown between the Eastern Bloc and the so-called Democratic West. And in the '72 Olympics, you had a number of these sort of events, including, I guess, most notably the U.S. Basketball team against the Soviet hoops team in the gold medal finals, controversially won by the Soviet Union. The U.S. has long disputed the results and, in fact, never has picked up their silver medals, never accepted them. But I think the real story of the '72 Olympics was the hostage crisis when Black September entered the Olympic Village, and in relatively short order, killed the entire Israeli Olympic delegation. Most of the Olympic delegation, 11 Israeli administrators or athletes, were killed. All of the members of the Black September, a Palestinian splinter group, were killed, and then one West German policeman was killed as the terrorists tried to move the athletes out of the Olympic Village to the airport with a flight, supposedly a flight to the Middle East. It was, I think, in many ways, sort of the first high-profile terrorist event in world history, modern world history. Again, the nature of terrorism, again, always tries to exploit publicity, and Black September certainly did this. And images of the Black September terrorists poking their heads out of the apartment, Israeli apartment, quite went around the world, and are still, I think, quite well known. In the United States, of course, the Olympics were always a big deal. ABC Television had the Olympics at this time. ABC Television's lead broadcaster was a guy by the name of Jim McKay, and Jim McKay was up through the night, right, following the events. And famously, then upon the events at the Munich airport, stated, and they're all gone. We really didn't know, as the world didn't really know how to process all of this. This would, of course, unfortunately, not be the first highly publicized terrorist event. Really, in many ways, it was, again, kind of the first. The leader of the International Olympic Committee at the time, a guy by the name of Avery Brundage, decided to push ahead with the games. And this met with a tremendous amount of criticism. I think in retrospect, perhaps Brundage did. I mean, I think many people sort of want to sort of recalibrate their opinion of all this. And it doesn't look quite as bad as it did in 1972. Brundage only had a one-day respite. And then the games went on. And I think this was seen at the time as fairly cold and calculating. But I think I think you can make a case for it in retrospect. But this was and Dave, you can talk about this a little bit. This was a tremendous black eye for West Germany, who were hoping to use the games as a kind of coming out party in the decades following World War II.
A relaunch. Germany's new, modern, globally friendly face. They spent just gobs of money on new, interesting, very modern architecture, stadiums of the sort no one had seen before.
Right.
That Olympic Stadium is still a tourist attraction in Munich.
Yep.
And yeah, of course, all of that was came to naught as such because of this thing.
I think that's absolutely right. It's odd to think about how all the energy that and the expectations that West Germany had with this, but we were only a couple of decades removed from World War II, and of course, in a previous era, the Olympics had been used by then Nazi Germany in the mid-30s as a kind of, almost a kind of Nazi coming out party in 1936. And so it was enormously, it was a black mark. And it really, I think, changed the way the Olympics were perceived in terms of terrorism. It certainly, this would be the last large-scale event where there would be such lax security. It really was a kind of wake-up call for the globe, but it certainly didn't help Palestinians in any kind of meaningful way. I mean, I think the goals of Black September were a bit muddied, but the Palestinian cause was not in any way aided by this event. It was a disaster. It was a disaster all the way around. I'd like to just real quickly mention that in terms of music, in the September 72, there was a country album released, and the country album was from a guy by the name of Waylon Jennings. Now, Waylon Jennings had been around for a long time at this point. Waylon Jennings, in fact, was a kind of early rock and roller. He was part of that tour, along with the Big Bopper and Buddy Holly and the Crickets, that was touring the upper Midwest in the late 1950s. Jennings famously gave up his seat on the plane that then crashed, and killing the Big Bopper and Buddy Holly, the so-called day the music died. But Jennings had, from there, then sort of reinvented himself as a country act. Jennings didn't fit into a Nashville that was really defined by, it was a pretty tight box. There was a certain kind of Nashville way of looking, way of sounding, the sort of Nashville sound that was in many ways molded by guys, including Chet Atkins. And you had some figures like Jennings who were wanting to break away from that. And so this is what made this particular
the Outlaws.
The Outlaws, right? The Outlaws. And so Ladies Love the Outlaws was released in September 72. And what made this, I think, important was that Jennings' participation in this the kind of newly forming outlaw country movement really, I think, in many ways legitimized it. Now, the outlaw country music movement was, the appearance, longer hair, oftentimes beards, more casual clothing, if you will. I mean, Nashville was famous for, a fairly kind of buttoned down approach for both men and women, sartorially. So, performers would sort of let it all hang out. Also, the music then was much more aggressive, much more assertive. Also, times dealing with the topics that were important in the culture. And while this didn't necessarily launch Jennings into the kind of stratosphere in terms of a kind of, American popular music, it solidified the outlaw country music to the point where Jennings, guys like Chris Christopherson, Willie Nelson, Hank Williams Jr., David Allan Coe, Steve Young, who wrote, among other things, Seven Bridges Road. This outlaw country music then began to take shape. And interestingly, that shifted the balance of power in country music away from Nashville a bit and moved it toward Texas, particularly Austin, Texas, where Austin, Texas then became really sort of the heart of outlaw country. And so as we move from the early 70s into the mid 70s, this outlaw country music is sort of bubbling up from within, and then we'll make interesting sort of connections with rock artists, because this is also the time, right, where country rock is reaching its zenith, right? And so country rock acts are going to become really important in the United States in the early into mid 70s. And so you've got a lot of things happening culturally, and I think one last thing about outlaw country, it is a kind of, to some degree, kind of a coming out party on a larger stage for country music, which was largely pigeonholed in a specific kind of area, and outlaw country broadened, to some degree, kind of broadened country's appeal to people who would have never listened to the cosmopolitan, countrypolitan sounds of, RCA, Nashville. But when you had, David Allan Coe or again, Willie Nelson singing, yeah, okay, that appealed. And so it's considered an important record, not necessarily wildly popular, but considered an important record.
And these were also the people that Johnny Cash chose to hang out with and associate with.
I think, to final that, yeah, if I could, I mean, I think that Cash's participation with, for example, the working with Christopherson, working with Jennings, working with Willie Nelson, that definitely solidified it. Cash's approval was always really important to artists, well, no matter where they were on the spectrum of the genre. But yeah, you're right. So this becomes a big movement in not just kind of country music, but music in general. What else is going on?
It becomes the birthplace of people like the artistic birthplace of people that I love, like Steve Earle and so on.
100%.
Yeah.
No, that's 100%. Townes Van Zandt, people like. That's absolutely true. And then it spins off, from there. Outlaw country never sold a huge number of records, either in the popular music writ large or in country music specifically, but artistically they made a huge impression, and it spoke to a kind of country that people were more open to, were more interested in, and Waylon Jennings was really at the heart of that. What else is going down in September of 72?
Well, we have, for one thing, in television, we have a new season coming out, and that includes shows like MASH,
Yep.
1972,
Yes.
The Waltons, Mott, Sanford and Sons started a little bit earlier in the year, but that's also
That's right.
another new Norman Lear, as Mott is. So Norman Lear, of course, was very, very big in this period of television history, and is coming out with one series after the other. So that's going on television in
Hugely influential shows. I mean, all four of those actually, I mean, made a mark then and now. I mean, they're in their own way. They're each kind of landmarks.
September 8th, All the Young Dudes by Mott
Oh, there we
comes
go.
out. This was, we've talked about a little bit about this. This was actually an album further than Mott had intended to even go. They were very close to just shutting it all down.
Oh, they were going to throw in the towel, right?
Even before this album was made. But the title cut from this album changed everything for them. All the Young Dudes, written by David Bowie, of course. Mott had been under contract with Island Records. They made this one and it was released by CBS Records. There's some confusion or some uncertainty about whether that was legal or whether this would not have actually been Island Records property, but in the end, nobody really made an issue of it. So, All the Young Dudes, an important record by Mott the Hoople.
That's right.
Released on the 8th. Summer Breeze by Seals and Croft, fourth album of theirs, released on Warner Brothers. That came out on the 9th. Rocky Mountain High, John Denver's 6th studio album, and it was his first U.S. top 10 album.
Yeah, that's right. First, again, kind of coming out. He had been taking the Home Country Roads previously,
right?
And obviously, but this album really put Denver on the map, and also helped launch Denver's. I mean, John Denver became a kind of almost a kind of cultural figure. I mean, so you definitely had this music career, right? But then Denver would eventually then enter television and movies. And it's odd to think about this, but he was a movie star of some renown, bizarrely, in the 1970s, starring alongside people like George Burns and Oh God, for example. So
well, he was very personable. He was very
personable. Yeah. And he was also kind of the face of a kind of popular face of the environmental movement in a way. I mean, that Rocky Mountain High album cover with him, in hiking boots and stuff like that, it definitely made an impression on people. And of course, then the song became beloved in Colorado, became a kind of Colorado state anthem, all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. It's his two big hits at that point.
Well, that's right.
Well, celebrate essentially two different mountain ranges, one in the east and one in the west.
Yeah, and both, I think, officially embraced by the state governments of both those states. It's almost kind of quasi state songs or whatever. Yeah,
it's funny. Then we also have Catch Bull at 4, Cat Stevens.
Yeah.
Studio album. This was one of the top, one of the number one albums of the year.
Yep.
We also have Hot Butter by Hot Butter. So this was a short-lived group.
It was
mostly instrumental.
Yeah, almost a kind of commercial. Almost a kind of commercial for the Moog synthesizer in a way, right?
Exactly, and
kind of
their big hit. Their one big hit was Popcorn, of course. You've already talked about Waylon Jennings. My Time by Boz Scaggs was released, his 5th album. And just a sample of the stuff that was going on.
Yeah, tremendous diversity as always. Yeah, tremendous diversity. And so that takes us, I guess, to October of 72. So it's the fall of 72. What's happening? What's happening in October? So,
well, for one thing, in October, Polaroid, the Polaroid camera was introduced, October 26th.
That's okay. That's a long time ago, 50 years ago. But the Polaroid camera was considered a game changer.
It was in many ways, yes.
It was. People were so excited about the prospect. I mean, the Polaroid's real claim to fame, right, was that the picture developed before your eyes, right?
You shake it like a Polaroid.
And yeah, and so in this picture would like magic. And so it was one of those things that every family wanted. Every family wanted a Polaroid camera, and a lot of families bought them.
Yes, yeah. And the film was expensive, but
It was
it's instant gratification.
exactly right? Instant gratification.
You see it, you have it,
and it felt futuristic. Because previously, right, film had to be developed, and for most people, this meant taking their film to a film developer. You would drop it off; it would come. But now you could do this, and you'd have pictures immediately. It was
right.
was just jaw dropping in this way.
And you didn't have the development costs, so
well, that's right. So even though the film was expensive, the development costs, and again, the immediacy. I think just people were just taken with it. Just that's what they wanted.
Musically, we have some interesting stuff. Billy Preston comes out with "Music Is My Life."
Oh man,
his 7th studio album, and his first #1 single from that. "Will It Go Round in Circles?"
Few people are bigger than Billy Preston in the early '70s. I mean, he's essentially a kind of fifth Beatle.
Yes.
And, he's
playing on their Abbey Road. Sorry, is it? It's
Let It Be. Let It Be. Yeah. So he's he's on the rooftop and all that.
Top of the building,
and he's such a charismatic performer. I mean, he has this in this area. He has a gigantic fro, and he's just playing the hell out of the clavinet. And he's a monster.
He's everywhere, right? Yeah. Concert for Bangladesh.
That's right.
Stuff like that.
That's right.
So "Music Is My Life" that comes out on A&M Records. We have "Crazy Horses" coming out on the 14th by the Osmond Brothers. This is the fourth studio album of theirs.
Yes.
And it's an attempt to change the direction.
That's right. That's fair.
And the image of the group.
That's right. Yeah.
To be a little less innocent, a little less harmless, maybe just a touch of danger and rock and roll.
That's right. And to a degree, it's successful. I mean, we talked about this in an earlier episode, but that song in particular is pretty good.
Yes,
pretty good. The title track is pretty good.
On the 23rd, "I'm Still in Love with You" by Al Green for High Records. Yeah. So
the Memphis label. So yeah, Al Green could do no wrong in the early '70s. That's for sure. And owns the charts.
On the 28th, another Stevie Wonder album. The 15th this time. "Talking Book."
Look out. So this is, I mean, yeah. And so featuring, among other things, Superstition. This, as you noted earlier, this is where Stevie Wonder becomes, he becomes in many ways sort of a dominant figure, not just musically, but almost culturally. I mean, he's profoundly influential.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Talking Book.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Other albums of the month, we have "Barnstorm" by Joe Walsh, his debut album.
Yep, the trio. Yeah, and so it's that's a fine album. I don't know. It's definitely worth. It's if you're unfamiliar with it, it's really, really strong. Joe Walsh is a way more nuanced artist than I think he's oftentimes given credit for. He sort of downplays all of this. He's kind of but he's very, very nuanced, and this is a fantastic album.
Yeah, so that was the first album after the James Gang.
Right.
Then we have stuff like Guitar Man by Bread, their fifth album, the second album of the year.
Yeah.
Lady Sings the Blues, another soundtrack. This one by Diana Ross.
Yeah, and this is right. This is the whole Berry Gordy. This is the transition album, right? In terms of sort of Motown and all that. That this is where Motown wants to head as a company.
Right? Exactly. This is Roth's fourth #1 album, but it's her only one as a solo artist. And
that's right. Yeah.
Of course, she's plays Billie Holiday.
Billie Holiday, yeah.
In this biopic, the Lady Sings the Blues.
It does give you, yeah, that's right. It does give you pause, though. I mean, a solo artist like Diana Ross, who's been really influential. Obviously, she, great famous Supremes, but I mean, went on to tremendous successes. So only one solo LP hit #1, and it's this one. It's the soundtrack. It's kind of surprising.
Yeah. We also have things like the debut album of Loggins and Messina.
Yep.
I'm sorry, no, Loggins and Messina, it's a self-titled album, but it's their second album.
Yeah, so Jim Messina, right, that's right. Jim Messina, who was in the earliest incarnation of Poco, but left just after the first album was recorded, then casting about for a partner. And he thought he found a kind of junior partner in Kenny Loggins, but curiously over time, right, Kenny Loggins kind of surpassed him.
Yeah.
Much to Messina's chagrin.
We also have Stealers Wheel, which is the self-titled debut album of that group.
Right.
So,
which features Jerry Rafferty, right?
Jerry
Rafferty, who
considerable solo success later.
That's exactly right. But who leaves Stealers Wheel almost as soon as this LP is recorded. In fact, they film a promotional video of Stealers Wheel, and you hear Jerry Rafferty's voice, but you don't see Jerry Rafferty in it. It's very disconcerting. But right. Timing is everything, and this timing kind of messed up.
Okay, this album known for Stuck in the Middle with You,
yeah,
of course. And then To Whom It May Concern by the Bee Gees. This is they had split for a while, but back together and we're making music again. So that's October.
Okay, well let's think a little bit about November. A couple things from sort of the entertainment world from November. One is the HBO home box office hits the air in, of all places, Allentown, Pennsylvania, in November of '72, and it is part of the nascent cable network. Now, cable television in the United States, I mean, there were experiments with cable television dating back to almost to World War II, but as a kind of commercial venture, cable television kind of hit the ground in New York City in the mid-1960s. Now, part of the reason that cable television was even needed was that the reception in urban areas for over-the-air television, where people would put up big antennas and whatnot, was actually a little bit spotty in urban centers, as buildings and whatnot would block signals. And so there was a kind of market for cable television, although polling across the nation was very clear that people did not want to pay a subscription for cable television. They just hadn't wanted no part of it. And I remember this quite distinctly as a kid in the 1970s when cable was introduced to my hometown, and my parents thought it was the most ridiculous idea they had ever heard, paying for television over my dead body. But so home box office then
but it did also offer movies with full frontal nudity.
It did. Eventually it did. And I think that was, certainly I think that was part of the appeal, that you could get uncut fare on cable television, specifically home box office, that you had no hope of ever seeing on over-the-air television. I mean, the networks were never going to show anything like that. The first program broadcast by HBO was actually a hockey game. It was a kind of quasi-sports kind of movie thing. The first movie HBO showed was something called the movie adaptation of the Ken Kesey novel, Sometimes a Great Notion. Eventually, of course, home box office was becoming very, very successful, and it is by far the oldest and most successful cable / sort of streaming venture there is, but it dates back a half century. Now, the other thing that we wanted to happen in sort of in the entertainment world, home entertainment world, if you will, is the introduction of Pong. Now, you mentioned a bit ago about the formation of Atari. And the Atari company then, their first big product was Pong. It was essentially a training exercise designed by an Atari engineer guy named Alan Acorn. And he was going to use it as a way to sort of, it's a warm-up exercise for engineers, actually. They realized what they had, and they put it into standalone systems that they would put in arcades. Now, an arcade was a business that had pinball machines in it, basically. Sometimes it had pool tables, but it was a place that you would travel, and you would, if you wanted to play pinball or this kind of thing, that you would go to an arcade. And this was really the sort of the first electronic game introduced in the United States, really in the world. Wildly successful. Part of the problem with Pong, these Pong machines, and they noticed after a few months that some of them were malfunctioning, was that there were so many quarters in the machines that it was screwing up the video quality. I'm not quite sure why, but they were almost too successful. And so the individual machine in early 1970 dollars would make between I have the notes here, something, yes, between $35 and $40 a day. In early 70s money. I mean, they were printing cash. Now, eventually, Atari would manufacture an at-home version. And I guess we haven't explained this, but Pong was essentially a game where there would be a kind of faux ball that would go back and forth, bouncing off of kind of paddles. It was very, very rudimentary.
There was also incredibly addictive. You could not stop playing.
This is the thing. I mean, a game that was so simple, maybe part of it was the simplicity, but you couldn't stop playing it. You could either play against yourself, or more importantly, you could play against an opponent, and you could play this damn thing for hours, and people did, just chucking quarters and quarters and quarters into these machines. Now, Atari, realizing they had a good thing, created an at-home version that would then interface with an ordinary television. And so it was the first kind of electronic game component that was available on the market, largely the first. And so they partnered with Sears Roebuck. So again, this is the 70s. And so when people shopped, one of the ways that they shopped was through something called a catalog. So it was a physical book that you could thumb through, and then either through the mail or by phone, you could order material that would either come to your home or come to the local Sears store where you could pick it up. What they partnered with Sears, they put it in the 1975 Sears Wish Book and sold, well, a lot of Pong units. And so suddenly, right, Pong becomes the rage, and Atari becomes a huge player in the entertainment business. And of course, Atari has always, they were innovative on a number of levels. So you think about November of 72. You have the introduction of, home gaming, essentially, or sort of a nascent home gaming, as well as then subscription television. And where are we today, right, in the 21st century? What do people occupy themselves with, right? Subscription television and home gaming. So the future, I guess, in a way, started in 72. One other thing I wanted to mention here, in terms of kind of music, but more broadly, I think culture, is that in this month, November 72, a woman named Marlo Thomas got together a number of celebrity friends, people like Mel Brooks, Tom Smothers, Diana Ross, Rosie Greer, Shel Silverstein, very interesting choice there. And they put together a book and an album called Free to Be You and Me. Now, it was built around the theme of a kind of gender neutrality, although that wasn't the phrase at the time, but basically it was couched as, if you're a young person, whether you're a girl or a boy, you can do anything, and you should be able to do anything. So young girls, you should think about careers in science, and young boys, you should think about family and taking care of children and being open with your emotions. And it was revolutionary. it was revolutionary. It really was. It really tapped into changes in the larger culture, a kind of opening up, a kind of freeing of sort of gender identity. That little kids were no longer to sort of be in that box, and it met with almost universal approval initially. I mean, this was an enormously popular item, huge popularity, both the book and the record album. Now, eventually, really decades later, it ran into real controversy, and the far right in the United States really ginned up a lot of controversy and really saw this, cast aspersions upon this effort as a kind of the beginning of wokeness and all sorts of things. But I think it's important to note in 1972, 1973, parents were relieved that this thing was available for them and bought it by, every young kid had a copy of Free to Be You and Me. And this is the kind of thing that was played in schools. The kids would, school programs, if you had a second or third grade school program, the kids would be singing songs from this, parents are people, housework, helping, it's all right to cry. Eventually, this was enshrined in the Library of Congress as a recording of merit. In a way, it's fascinating that Marlo Thomas kind of had sort of two careers. She had a career as a kind of comedic actress, which I think, hit its high water mark in the late 60s, very early 70s with That's Girl.
The Girl.
I think she made a much bigger contribution to the culture overall with Free to Be You and Me, which, had its 40th anniversary and so on and so on. But noteworthy achievement culturally.
Well, and it was woke.
It was. It was woke before there was woke, right? It was woke. But it was also the case that people were really, really ready to hear it. And I think, the notion of, I'm old enough to remember, these kinds of conversations and the notions, right, of young boys participating in childcare or young girls being interested in science. It was considered a radical notion. Well, this part of the origin of that comes from Free to Be You and Me. This was also produced with help from the Ms. Foundation for Women, Ms. Magazine, which is launched roughly this time as well. And so there's a kind of real attempt to sort of get people to throw their energy behind this. And it really was a kind of, as much as a recording was a kind of symbol of changes in the larger culture.
Yeah.
So with that, what else is going down in November 72? Besides, of course, that election.
Well, okay, we'll come back to the election.
Fair enough.
We have something like a young woman, the divine Miss M, coming out with her first studio album.
Yep.
Co-produced by Barry Manilow, by the way.
So interesting. That's an interesting story there. Yeah.
And Bette Midler was, I think, from the beginning of her career, something of a gay icon.
100%. Yes.
Right, and I think that's maybe explains Barry Manilow's involvement.
Well, that could be. Midler got her start playing gay bathhouses. She had a huge, as you're suggesting, huge gay following. Barry Manilow was her longtime musical director. This album in particular, though, was quite popular. Do You Want to Dance? It put 4 singles into the top 40. Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy, I think, which was a remake of an Andrew Sister song. She really, talk about coming out of the box hot. Bette Midler, this is a big album.
We have on the 8th, a day later, Lou Reed releases Transformer, his second solo album and the second album of 1972, and considerably more significant than his first album.
Yeah, I think that's right. Considered an influential album. Again, oftentimes pops up on the list of some of the best albums of all time, some of the best albums of the 70s, all that. Yeah, it can be kind of a tough listen, but it did spawn a single, right?
Big single, Walk on the Wild Side.
There's no more bizarre single. Well, okay. There are
Well,
few more bizarre singles than Walk on the Wild Side. I
there
mean,
there are few that are so open about things like
yes,
transvestites, transsexuality, drug use.
that's right. I mean, it's pretty explicit, and it's hard to know how this actually got through, how this actually made it to market. I don't, because there's so much there that's just there. Oral sex, the whole deal, and it's like, but there it is, and this was a top 20 single for him, and it's almost inexplicable.
Of course, this is after Get Back, but still, it takes it a step further than Get Back did, and
yeah, I think so. Yeah,
and when you look at the history of banned records in American radio, you would definitely say, how did this get through?
That's exactly right. No, that's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, it's but the album itself is fascinating. It's very much like so many of Reed's things, kind of ode to New York and urbanness, and there's a certain kind of blackness to it, clearly influenced by his time with Andy Warhol in the Factory. Oh, geez. But yeah, there you go, Lou Reed.
On the 15th, we have Homecoming from America, their second studio album. The big hit from that, of course, is Ventura Highway.
Yeah, beautiful song.
We talked about that just last month. Then 2 days later, on the 17th, the Moody Blues comes out with Seventh Sojourn, which is their 8th album, which is a strange title for an 8th album, but there you have it. Singer and Rock and Roll Band, I think, is the big hit.
It is that John Lodge number. Yeah, right.
Right. James Brown puts out yet another album, Get on the Good Foot.
You talk about work ethic. Let's talk about. I mean, you can make
the hardest working man in show business.
100%. That is no exaggeration. You can challenge his artistic choices and all of that, but my God, that guy put a lot of time in the studio and touring and everything else.
On the 27th, we have Garden Party by Ricky Nelson.
Yeah.
Or Rick Nelson. Nelson. It's actually Rick Nelson and the Stone Canyon Band. And of course, the hit off of that, the hit single is the same title, Garden Party. It tells about his experience of being booed off the stage at Madison.
For sure. Yeah. And as we mentioned in a previous episode, Rick Nelson, probably one of the most underappreciated figures in rock history. I mean, he was. I mean, Rick Nelson helped make rock. It was just staggering his achievements as a young man.
So huge. This, of course, was a type of comeback for him.
That's right. That's
fair. In the 50s and early 60s, he was one of the. Well, you would have put him on the rock Mount Rushmore, right?
That's right.
Right up there.
You certainly would have. Yeah, if you would have stopped rock and roll at like 1960 or 62 or something like that, Rick Nelson would have been up there.
He outsold Chuck Berry.
Yes.
By millions.
Rick Nelson.
As an example.
That's absolutely the case. Yeah.
Right up there with Elvis and
yes.
Incredible.
Right alongside, yes.
So other albums of the month, we have Can't Buy a Thrill. Who did that?
The one, the only. Steely Dan, Walter Becker, and Donald Fagen. Although Steely Dan at this time was actually a band, right? Donnie Diaz and Skunk Baxter and the like. But they played with Jay and the Americans for a while. They did all sorts of things. They were staff writers at ABC Dunhill. But this is the start of a really interesting next set of years for Steely
Dan. We also have Good Times, third studio album by Kool and the Gang.
Yep.
It didn't chart on the R&B album chart until March '73, but it got there. It peaked at number 34. We have Jesus Was a Capricorn by Chris Christopherson,
Yes.
with him and his soon-to-be wife, Rita Coolidge,
Yes.
on the cover. Why Me was #1 on the country singles chart.
It's one of the great songs of all time.
Why Me, Lord.
It tears you inside out. If you listen to it closely, it just like, woo.
What have I ever done?
That's it.
Then we have Joe Cocker with his third studio album.
Yeah.
It was released in Europe as Something to Say, but this was a self-titled album. We have No Secrets by Carly Simon.
Carly Simon, yes, formerly of the Simon Sisters, right? And so this is her kind of, yeah, and she becomes, right? I mean, I think it's fair to say that sort of the early to mid 70s, Carly Simon is kind of alongside her then husband, James Taylor, is almost kind of the first couple of American popular music.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair to say. They got married earlier in the year at her apartment.
Yeah.
So we have yet another Partridge Family album, Notebook.
Were there any singles that jumped off of Notebook? Was there because they're really at the end.
They're really at the end, yeah. Hold on here.
Man, we understand that Wes Farrell is still guiding the ship, but at this point, again with an album every 6 or 7 months, I didn't Notebook yield anything of interest.
Well, no.
Yeah.
No, not really.
No, it's kind of
it's all over.
It's kind of over, yeah. But yet it never is actually when you think about the Partridge Family. The interest is still there.
Oh,
it's just still there.
Well,
bizarrely,
they had millions of devoted fans. That doesn't just stop overnight. That's just these people created memories for
it doesn't.
A little generation,
and while most people won't admit it, it pulled millions into either playing or paying more attention to popular music. It really sparked interest in young people of that era.
I really like the Partridge Family. I must say, the Partridge Family Greatest Hits doesn't hold up as well as some other greatest hits from the time.
It's no Simon and Garfunkel Greatest Hits, for example. But
it's not even. I don't think they even hold up well compared to the Monkees, for instance. But
yeah, that's right.
There are still Partridge Family songs that I really enjoy listening to, but it's a handful,
Yeah, that's right.
So there's that. Well, one of the things we still wanted to talk about was what happened on November 7th.
Oh, the 7th. That must have been the election.
The landslide massacre of George McGovern.
Oh my God! Yeah. Yeah, it's an all-timer. It really is an all-timer. Poor McGovern in a way. I mean, he's from South Dakota, but didn't even win South Dakota. It's
you got Massachusetts.
Oh, there you go. And I think the District of Columbia. I think that's right.
Oh, that might be.
I think he won 2. I mean, but and again, so the scale, and it was in the elect. So that's the Electoral College. The popular vote. I mean, let's don't kid ourselves. It wasn't close. I mean, it was a landslide on every level, which makes, again, right, then the whole Watergate debacle all the more bizarre and unnecessary, because you could see this coming. I mean, it wasn't as though somehow that McGovern was going to, catch fire, get some track. No, none of that was going to happen. And of course, McGovern shoots himself in the foot with the whole vice presidential debacle and all that. Oh my God.
Well, and be clear, this was an event that traumatized the progressive left for a half century.
Certainly did.
Right? They're still, or at least the Democratic Party still has a massive fear of anything left of center because
I think you're absolutely right. So can you talk a little bit about that? So McGovern, McGovern was the progressive movement's, almost a kind of perfect candidate. I mean, and so
Unapologetic, very, very progressive in terms of the policies that he was
that's right.
proposing. Unfortunately, above all, was the anti-Vietnam thing. We've got to get out of Vietnam.
Yes.
Unfortunate because Nixon had kind of taken that away.
He kind of co-opted it. Yes, he had. That's right.
They were involved in peace talks with Vietnam that were looking to be successful. And he could at least say, I'm making the effort. We're getting there. And so just to say, I want to get out of Vietnam doesn't bring him anywhere, because Nixon says, well, that's what I'm working on at this moment.
It took it took the state.
Really took the wind out of the sails.
Yeah. But it was the case that he was the progressive wing of the Democratic Party was fully behind McGovern. Others were less certain, and were essentially kind of bullied into accepting McGovern. I mean, the Democratic Party had been to hell and back during the 1960s, and so it was a poor choice, and the McGovern campaign.
And at the beginning of the year, the favorite, everybody's the conventional wisdom was, well,
that's right.
Muskie is going to be the candidate. He fell victim to one of the dirty tricks from.
Oh, that's right, in New Hampshire. That's right, in the New Hampshire snow. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah, Nixon buried him. I mean,
so it ended up being McGovern, and the McGovern campaign, in addition to perhaps proposing some policies that were not extremely popular, also just was one mistake after the other. It's big mistakes.
That's right. Yeah, textbook campaign of what not to do.
That's exactly right.
And again, worth noting that the campaign manager was a guy by the name of Gary Hart, who eventually would run for president and kind of disgrace himself in his own unique way a few years later. So the election was a complete debacle for the Democrats, and Nixon was riding high. And it was unimaginable that Nixon would fall from grace the way he did. I mean, even Nixon's opponents would have conceded in November 72 that, he's a wildly popular president, and we're just going to have to bide our time until 76, because there's just nothing he can't be dislodged in any kind of way. He's going to steamroll.
An election like that is mandate writ large, right? I mean,
yeah, and how could you not read it as anything but that? And so on the heels of international successes, the war is coming to an end in its own way. Nixon wins this. I mean, it's not only for Nixon, but I think the Republican Party really believed that the time was theirs.
And it's worth mentioning that this is a 50-year anniversary of the so-called Christmas bombings. So there were war crimes going on behind this whole effort to find peace with honor, right?
It's yes, that's right.
No question about that.
There's no question about that. I think that's right. Yes, that's right. But on the surface, it all looked amazingly integrated in its own way, sort of forward thinking. And Nixon was, seemingly everyone's champion, and it just all came apart in ways that are still 50 years later. You just can't quite believe the speed in which it all just unraveled.
Yeah. It did. An own goal.
Yeah. So that's November. So the end of the year. So December of 1972. What's noteworthy?
Well, in December, the default December 16th, the Dolphins ended a undefeated season.
Oh my God.
14-0.
Yeah.
That was Don Shula Dolphins, of course.
Yeah, that's right.
With greats like Bob Greasy and Larry Zonka. Who's the quarterback?
Bob Greasy was the quarterback.
What's
In
the
the
quarterback?
backfield, was Larry Zonka and a guy named Jim Kick who went to college at Wyoming, and the wideout of note was a guy named Paul Warfield.
It was amazing to watch that team play.
Yeah, it was.
Any play that they did would get 5 yards. It was 5 yards, at least 5 yards with every play.
It seemed, he's exactly right. It seemed they were in a pretty weak division, but it seemed as though they could do no wrong. And you're right. They just steamrolled teams, and they ended up winning the Super Bowl that year. They completed the season 17-0, and it still stands as the only real in the modern era in football. It's just the lone undefeated, untied team. Yeah, Shula's 72 Dolphins. Yeah,
72 Dolphins was a miracle team. On December 23rd, we had another miracle, the Immaculate Reception.
Yeah, Franco Harris, right? So the Steelers are playing. Steelers playing the Raiders.
Yeah, this is worth mentioning that he died. He didn't die on that 50th anniversary.
Not on that, but just very
within a week. Within a week.
Yeah. So and so the controversy, I think sports fans know this, but the controversy was that in this era of the NFL, two offensive players could not touch the ball consecutively. So if the ball had gone off the Steelers' hands and then fell into Franklin Harris's hands, who then ran the ball for a touchdown, it would not be complete. But instead, the referees determined that it went off the helmet of a Raider, and then it went into Franco Harris's hands, and he ran for the touchdown. It remains a play even 50 years later in some dispute. And you look at the film, and it's like the Zapruder film, right? You can look at different angles, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it really is not possible to determine.
No, you just can't.
100% certainty.
No, you can't. No, but you're right. It was an enormous event.
Well, and the Steelers, who became something of a powerhouse throughout the 70s,
certainly did.
Had not been up until that point. Not at all.
Oh, they were dreadful for decades. They were terrible. Yes, you're right.
But Franco Harris went on to be part of a successful team.
That's right.
It's all good.
It all worked out. Yeah.
December 31st, of course, Roberto Clemente died.
Yeah, a relief mission. Yeah.
Yes, a very sad story. But that went on. So I guess apart from sports, all that's left to talk about is music. Oh, well, it's also on December 31st, a completely different topic, but it was the very first New York Rocking Eve broadcast.
Oh my God. So this is Dick Clark. Dick Clark's New York Rocking Eve.
Although the first one was the Three Dog Nights Rocking Eve.
Oh,
and
wait a minute.
Dick Clark hosted.
Oh, but
or commented or something. He was like the MC, but the Three Dog Night was the featured.
So they were
headliners.
Well, this is another reason why Three Dog Night always carried that kind of uncool label. They were kind of like the only band that your parents would listen to. But okay, so yes, so branded as Three Dog Nights.
That was also the only one where it wasn't Dick Clark. Dick Clark's New York Rocking Eve.
That thing ran for a long time, right?
It ran for 40 years anyway.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, Dick Clark. But
and he was doing it like right up until the end, as long as he could be on his feet.
That's right. Even after his stroke, I think he participated a couple times. But yeah, that was always a weird deal where a lot of some of the acts were live, many of them weren't. I remember being sort of pumped to watch those things, then always being sort of disappointed, like, oh, this is not so great. Much like New Year's Eve itself. Kind of, there's no more overrated night on the calendar than New Year's Eve. Oh, there you go. I've taken my stance.
All right. Musically, we had on the 8th of December a Marvin Gaye album, Trouble Man. Trouble Man is the soundtrack,
Oh,
but it's also Marvin Gaye's 12th studio album. Um, and if we want to talk about people that were keeping Motown alive,
it's
Marvin
right.
Gaye
He was
right
right
up
there.
there, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So there's that. We have Hot August Night, the live Neil Diamond album, which was
I think yes,
incredibly successful.
in many ways, yes, it was incredibly successful. And that image of Young on the cover, and he's got the half cape and all that kind of stuff. It's yeah, he was it.
So yeah, Neil Diamond, Hot August Night. Then we have the Grand Wazoo, not Frank Zappa's eighth studio album. It's his second or third album of 1972. This is also a guy that loves to make music and
That's for sure.
and record, right?
I mean, say what you will, he had a work ethic and was deeply engaged in the recording and writing process. Absolutely.
We have the Sweets' biggest hits, and the Sweets' biggest hits is fantastic.
Yes, it is.
The Sweet,
no argument there. The
boy,
Sweet,
just
yes,
incredible group.
yeah,
Stuff that they put out, oh, so much fun.
agreed. Yeah, those singles from Little Willie to Ballroom Blitz to all of that
Yeah.
they're great.
So,
They're a highly manufactured band in their own way and all that, but I mean those singles are, I think, well recorded, and they're sneaky awesome.
oh yeah, yeah. Um, we have another live album from Deep Purple, made in Japan.
That's a big one. Yeah, for metalheads,
Double
that's a
live
big
album,
one.
yes. So that's a big one for them. Um, have another album by Merle Haggard.
Mhm.
It's not love, but it's not bad. It's
Bag.
the 15th studio album of his, Merle Haggard
Yes.
and the
Yeah.
Strangers.
Yeah, Mr. Bakerfield, Mr. Bakerfield, California, the Bakersfield Sound, Merle Haggard and Buck Owens kept that thing alive for a long time. Yeah.
And REO Speedwagon has
This has to be early REO.
early REO, but it's their second studio album.
Second album. Okay.
REO TWO.
Oh, right. Yeah, TWO. The REO will become one of the biggest bands in the world, amazingly, at the end of this decade, in early 80s. I mean, they are really. REO's career speaks to the patience that record companies once had, right? The REO went through album after album after album with really very little until sort of the mid 1970s. But once they hit big.
Yeah.
No question.
So that brings us to the end of the year.
1972 was quite a year. Maybe, I mean, some people would suggest it's maybe the greatest year in music history. It's certainly right up there. But
we're lot happy of really great stuff. Yeah.
We're happy
classics.
Classics. Yeah, no question. And really, I think for us, I mean, a year that helped shape our sensibilities.
Oh, definitely.
In its own way, we became music fans in part because of years like 1972. No question about it.
That was a very, very early part of my music development, and yes, very much.
Mine as well. So with that in mind, Dave, take us home.
All right. If you enjoyed our video, and we hope you did, you can watch some other videos of this sort. Our 50 years ago this month has videos like this one. You'll definitely want to check out today's playlist, which is right here.
That's right.
And feel free to subscribe to our channel right here.
You got it. And as always, we include a reading list each month, as well as keep in mind we are on Twitter. Stephen Daves 1 at Twitter. We tweet every day. So until next time, we'll see you then.
See you in 2023. Bye-bye.